Hey guys, it's Leah. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 2 of Bookmas. So today we're going to be going through my November wrap up from worst to best. In November I ended up reading 9 books, and honestly for the most part I feel like it was a really decent reading month. I read so many books I absolutely adored. I had 3 5 stars, which is unheard of for me. There were definitely also some more popular reads that I definitely didn't like as much as other people, so I'm excited to get into the wrap up and let's see which one was the worst one. The worst book that I read in November was undoubtedly The Housemaid by Freida McFadden. I have only read one Freida McFadden book before this one. I believe it's called They Never Lie, and I wasn't a huge fan of it. I did end up reading this one for a 24-hour reading vlog that I did in November. I will link it up above if you haven't watched it yet. For that it was really good because it is definitely a page turner. But when it came to the actual plot and the writing style and the characterization, I wasn't a huge fan of it for a multitude of reasons. I will definitely say that the most exciting and enjoyable part of me reading this book was being able to rip it apart. And I definitely want to preface that I don't feel like this is a thriller that holds itself to high standards per se. I think it is just what it is and it doesn't pretend to be anything more. For that I feel like I can't be too critical, and I do feel like it is a thriller book for people who haven't read extensively in the genre before, solely because a lot of the kind of twists or one big plot twist that a lot of people talk about I have seen done quite a couple of times. So for me it wasn't really surprising. I did kind of figure it out fairly early on, and I definitely would recommend it perhaps if you only haven't read many thrillers before. The Housemaid follows Millie, who has very recently gotten out of prison for about 10 years. She's really trying to get her life back on track. She's applying for jobs, but no one is obviously wanting to take her. But one day she does apply to be a housemaid in this really lavish home with this really rich family, and she gets the job. Initially she's obviously extremely confused because she is like, have they not done any kind of background research on me? She has just come out of prison and they have a child also. But she does get the job anyway, and then it is just a story about what kind of unravels in the home, the secrets there, the dark intrigue-ish. I think my main gripe with this book was I didn't like the way that Millie was written as a female protagonist. I did not like it at all. I feel like she was kind of written so that she was stupid and wouldn't really clock on to what was happening solely for the plot's sake. I think the biggest example of that is when she first gets this job and she is entering the home. She is given the attic room as her bedroom for her work, and as she enters the room she is talking about how there is a lock on the door, but it only locks from the outside, so she can't lock herself inside the room. And the cherry on top of the cake is that inside the room, on like the door on the inside, there are scratch marks. So she questions it because she's like, why are there scratch marks on the inside of this door? This is terrifying. But she very quickly forgets about it and just completely brushes it under the rug. And I don't know about you, but I would get out of there as quick as I can. So I do feel like that instantly for me set up my opinion for this novel, albeit I definitely didn't want to dislike this. I actually had really high hopes for it, but ended up rating it 2 stars. I've heard incredibly good things about the sequel, however. I've heard better things about the sequel than this one, so I don't know if I will ever get round to it, just because I don't want to read a book knowing that I most likely won't enjoy it unless it's for some sort of video. So if you have read The Housemaid or The Housemaid's Secret and you didn't really like this one but you liked The Housemaid's Secret, definitely let me know because I could be convinced. But I am just accepting that I may just be of the unpopular opinion for this book. But this was the worst one that I read in November. I rated it 2 stars. The next worst book that I read in November was The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangum and Donna. I will say that this is definitely not a bad book, and I wouldn't compare it to the likes of The Housemaid in terms of what my opinion was. I ended up rating this one 3 stars. This one is a very cozy witchy read, and that is all it kind of was for me. I feel like recently I've really established that if I am going to pick up something that is to do with witches or fantasy and it's not necessarily literary, I don't really like extremely low stakes. And that is exactly what this was. The stakes were incredibly low. I think the stakes were solely based on there were these witches, these children, and basically the public couldn't find out that these children were witches. And I know so many people who have absolutely adored this, and it is one that I definitely think a lot of people will like, especially if you are into that cozier low stakes sort of fantasy vibe. For that, it is great. Loved the atmosphere that it painted. I loved the witchy element. I hadn't read a book to do with witches in so long, and I had definitely missed it, so I'm definitely excited to read more now. But yeah, unfortunately for me, this is one that is going to be fairly forgettable, so I ended up rating it 3 stars. I would recommend it, but it wasn't a favourite. We then have Belladonna by Adeline Grace. This is one that I had incredibly high expectations for, and thus was quite intimidated to get into. I did listen to the audiobook for this, and I don't know if that somewhat impacted my enjoyment in terms of the pacing, but I ended up rating this one 3.5 stars. I can't remember exactly what I settled on, but it is definitely around that range. And this book was okay. I think the main thing that I adored in this book was how gothic it was. I loved the gothic estate. I loved the atmosphere. I loved the writing style. A lot of the times it was quite lyrical. Oh, and obviously I also loved the kind of relationship between our protagonist and Death. Every single time they were in a scene together, I was kind of giggling and kicking my feet, unashamedly so. I will say that I do think this is a great one for somebody trying to get into fantasy, as somebody who is trying to get into fantasy and is increasingly reading more but hasn't read too many before. This one was really good for that. I feel like the world building and just everything like that was incredibly simple and definitely was not dumped on you from the get-go. Again, if you have read this series, please let me know what you also thought about it and if it does get better, because yeah, I don't know whether I want to carry on. I'm quite inclined to. But again, I rated this one 3.5 stars. I would probably recommend it. We then have A Haunting on the Hill by Elizabeth Hand. This book I have spoken about so much recently. It's another one that I read in the 24-hour readathon in November. And if you don't know what this book is about, it was basically deemed the sequel of A Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson by like the Shirley Jackson Society. They basically gave Elizabeth Hand the opportunity and the privilege of writing the sequel to A Haunting of Hill House, which is insane. And for that, I am such a huge fan of Shirley Jackson and A Haunting of Hill House. We've Always Lived in the Castle. I absolutely adore those books, so I was quite nervous going into this knowing it was a sequel. And would I say it lived up to the expectations I had for it? In some ways, yes. In others, definitely not. To say that I struggled with the first half of the book, I wouldn't say that's the right phrase, but I definitely preferred the second half. 3/4 of the way through the book, I was like, okay, I'm getting 5-star feelings. But because I didn't 100% get into the first half of the book the way that I had hoped and I thought I would, I couldn't really rate it any higher than a 3.75/4 star. I think it's one of those books that I'll probably get more out of when I do decide to one day reread it, just like A Haunting of Hill House. I really want to reread that. I read it like 3 years ago now, so my mind was a little bit rusty, but I just love every single thing to do with Hill House, the show too. And this book, not thinking about it as a sequel to that sort of legacy and solely as like a haunted house story, I would have loved it so much more. I feel like because I had the expectation of Hill House in my brain, and obviously I knew very well that it wasn't going to be by Shirley Jackson, so it wasn't going to be anything like her writing, I still had that high expectation in terms of how gothic and lyrical it was going to be, and it absolutely was gothic, but not in the way that I had hoped. So I would say that as a haunted house story, it is a solid book. As a sequel of A Haunting of Hill House, not so much. But yeah, I rated this one 3.75/4 stars. It could have been a 5 if the ending was like the whole book. We then have Tombs by Junji Ito, and this one is arguably one of my favorite Junji Ito collections that I have ever read. I ended up rating this one 4 stars, and I don't know why. I feel like I read this at the perfect time. A lot of these stories, obviously Junji Ito is like the master of horror manga, but all of these stories were so haunting and perfect for like spooky season for October. They're just so grotesque. I hadn't read a Junji Ito in so long, and I kind of forgot how impactful and disturbing his mangas are, and this one is definitely one of my favorites. I'm so excited to read more from him now. I have a couple on my shelf that I am very excited to read before the end of the year, hopefully. But this one was incredible. I think it is one of his newer collections too, so I would highly recommend it if you haven't picked it up already. I have just realized how bright all of these clips have been. I'm so sorry. But we then have Starling Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. This is another one that I listened to the audiobook for and I loved it. This has been getting so much hype recently. I believe it was picked for the Reese Witherspoon's like book club, and after that it just kind of skyrocketed, and I'm so happy it has. All I knew when going into this was that it was a haunted house story with a sentient house, and honestly that is all I need to know to go into any book ever, and it did not disappoint. I will say that physically reading this I probably would have gotten a little bit more out of it, and again another one that I am already excited to reread. I've been in a big rereading mood recently, but this was incredible and I'm still so happy that I listened to the audiobook. It was so incredibly atmospheric and gothic. I think one of the most unique like sentient house books I have ever read. I loved the way that Alex E. Harrow wrote a house with its own characteristics and personalities, and the way that the house literally aided but also enabled the character in terms of the plot and what was going on. I loved it. I thought it was so clever. So we kick off the book with our protagonist who doesn't really have a great home life. Her parents aren't really in the picture. It's just her and her brother, and they are quite poor. They're really not having a great time, and she's really determined to make her life better, not necessarily for her but for her brother. And I love the commentary on family in this book and how family sometimes goes against desire, and whether you will still stand with your family even if you are able to get what you've desired for so long. And it was so interesting. I loved the commentary in this. I loved the characterization. I loved the atmosphere and the setting. There is not one part of this book that I did not like, and I was so close to kind of giving it a 5-star, but I wasn't 100% sold on the pacing. Definitely were some times where I wasn't 100% embedded and involved and obsessed with the storytelling, but I could say that that could be down to the audiobook, which is why I would say it would be great to read this physically on a first go. But it was so good and I honestly could not recommend this enough. I did write an entire review on my Goodreads, which is always linked down in the description box below if you do want to go more in depth into my thoughts. But this was incredible. I love a sentient house. Obsessed with it. And have the only poetry collection that I read in November, which is quite surprising because in October I read quite a couple, and that is Bronte's The Selected Poem. So in November I went to the Bronte parsonage for the very first time, which was an absolute dream come true. As a huge Bronte lover, they are the reason that I fell in love with reading. I wrote my dissertation on them. I honestly think about them every single day. They are my Roman Empire, so getting to go to the Bronte parsonage for the first time was a dream. I can't even explain the feeling that it gave me. And after that, literally on the train home, I picked up this collection. This is a collection that just includes all of the Bronte's poetry, all of the sisters and their brother Patrick. I would have found it moving no matter when I did decide to pick it up, but reading it right after going to the Bronte parsonage and literally stepping foot into their home and seeing where they kind of grew up and how dreary and gloomy but beautiful Bronte country is now, I could visualize it all perfectly, and it made for such an incredible reading experience. And I ended up rating this one 5 stars. The day there is a Bronte book where I don't rate 5 stars, hell will go cold. It was just so beautiful and melancholic. I feel like too, if you haven't read any Bronte book yet and you definitely want to get into them, this is such a great taster into what their writing is like individually. But I mean, it was incredible. I wasn't expecting to feel any other way when reading this. I rated it 5 stars. I'd highly recommend. Oh my god, we then have my new all-time favorite romance book, another 5-star, obviously, and that is All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata. And I tell you that this book literally took over my life for a week. I was reading this so quickly. It's like 560 pages, so it's quite long. I read the first 300 pages essentially in one day and I had to stop because of my 24-hour readathon. I couldn't really read it in there. The second that the readathon ended, I finished this book. I could not put it down. I was obsessed, giggling, kicking my feet, throwing up also, and it was just so good. It had been so long since I'd read a Mariana Zapata, the first one being From Luke Off With Love, which I read a couple of years ago now and also rated 5 stars. So clearly she's a romance author that I really gel with. I'm really excited to read more from her. I think the next one is going to be From the Wall of Winnipeg and Me, if that's what it's called. I'm very excited for that one. Oh my god, Mariana Zapata is incredible at writing a slow burn romance that by the end really pays off. First of all, the smut at the end, I will say that only. But this entire book, it is also the perfect book to read in winter if you're looking for a romance to read this month. do this one. There are Christmas scenes in it, but we are basically following Aurora, who is kind of returning to her hometown after a couple of years. Her mum had a really horrible accident in a hike where she basically just went missing, and we don't really know what happened to her. Follow Aurora moving back, and she basically rents out this garage attached to this house, but the person whose house it is didn't realize that it was being rented out because his son posted it online. So she literally gets to the Rhodes house and is like, oh, I'm staying here, and Tobias Rhodes is like, no, you're f***ing not, I don't know who you are. But he does let her stay. It causes for so much tension and yearning. It is like locked room. It's giving one bed without the one bed, if you know what I mean. And just the characterization, the character development of seeing these two people, like from where they start to the very end, I think it was just done incredibly. It paid off so much, and I already, again, another one that I need to reread because I cannot get it out of my brain. It's just the perfect romance for me. Like, this is everything I've ever wanted in a romance book and so much more. I just literally cannot stop thinking about it. It was so much fun, but also quite impactful. It had commentary on family life and also grief. It's just so good. When I say that this is my new all-time favorite romance book, I need everybody to read it. I rated it 5 stars. I am never going to stop talking about this. Please read it. And the best book that I read in November, another 5-star, but incredibly different to All Rose Lead here, is The Chandelier by Clarice Lispector. Absolutely no surprise that I rated another Clarice Lispector 5 stars and that this was the best book that I read in November. She is now my all-time favourite writer. I kind of knew after reading Agua Viva and then Near to the Wild Heart, which, spoilers, I knew instantly after reading them that she was a writer and an author who resonated so deeply with me, who I needed to read every single thing from, learn about her entire life, which by the way is heartbreaking but such joy to read about. I just knew that she was going to become my new all-time favourite writer, and after having 3 back-to-back 5 stars from her, she's the only author who has ever done that for me. Yeah, this is The Chandelier. I am reading all of her books in chronological order. This is the second book she ever published. I read an article on this the second that I finished it, and it was so interesting and I learned so much. It was the last to be translated into English, but it is also the least spoken about book from her, and that kind of baffles me. The book was so incredible and so relatable and heartfelt. I really think that a lot of Clarice's works are best going into not really knowing too much and just seeing if you resonate with her writing, if you gel with it, because if you do and you don't really know what the books are about, that is how I go into all of them. You are met with such pleasant surprise and such joy and such emotion, and honestly, the way that I feel when I read her work is unlike anything I've ever felt when I read anything ever, including the Brontes, dare I say it. I really don't know what it is, but the way that she talks about life and love and death and philosophy is exactly how I feel about it all, and for that I really resonate with her so much, and I feel like I'm never ever gonna read any of her books and not rate them 5 stars, or the day that I do. But in The Chandelier, we are following our protagonist, who is a young girl. She starts her life living on a farm with her brother, and it is essentially just following her life, her growing up, becoming a young adult and being in like her early 20s. Follow her experiences with lovers and with friends, and with experiences on death and philosophy, and very much coming into her own and her own beliefs. But yeah, this book is just so incredible. I am gonna think about it forever, and you just need to read it. So those were all of the books that I read in November. We definitely had range. We definitely had some incredible books for the most part, some other ones that were a little bit average, but I'm very happy with what I did read. If you have also read any of the books that I spoke about in this video, please let me know what you thought about them, whether you like them or you dislike them or you want to read them. I would love to know. Also feel free to let me know what your favourite book that you read in November was, or if there is a book that you are dying to get to in December before the end of the year. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed day 2 of BOOKMAS. There are so many exciting videos coming your way. I am so excited. It brings me so much joy. And speaking of, if you enjoyed this video too but you are not yet subscribed and you would like to see more content from me, it would mean so much to have you here. And yeah, thank you so much for watching and for spending some time with me. I really hope you enjoyed, and I will see you again very soon with BOOKMAS Day 3.